Finally, let's have a look at rests. A rest is a symbol that tells the musician to stop playing for a specific time or value. For example, perhaps a composer of a piece for clarinet and piano wants the clarinet to stop playing for the value of a crotchet, or maybe even an entire bar. Music contains symbols which represent silence for a specific value. The rest symbol for a crotchet, which has a value of 1, is this, and you can see that I've added it to the column called rest. And we call it a crotchet rest. So a crotchet equals 1, but if a composer wanted a musician to be silent for a value of 1, they would write this symbol. Now, I often get asked what's the easiest way to write a crotchet rest, as it does look a little complex. Well, it takes a little bit of practice, but my advice is to, firstly, draw a little Z, or Z if you prefer. Secondly, add a little loop to the bottom. Okay, it doesn't look anything special, but if you draw it neatly, it will be clear that you're drawing a crotchet rest. Always be careful when drawing notes and rests on a stave. This is too big, this is too small. The crotchet rest fits nicely like this on the stave. A quaver rest looks like this, a little 7 with a blob at the start of the symbol. Like the quaver, it's worth half. A semiquaver rest looks similar to a quaver rest. Remember that a quaver has 1 tail, so the quaver rest has 1 arm. A semiquaver has 2 tails, so its rest has 2 arms. So this symbol represents a rest of a quarter. Now, the rest for a minim, semibreve and dotted minim look very similar. Let's look at the minim rest first. It's a little black rectangle which I've put onto a stave, those 5 lines. 2 very important things to notice here. Number 1, the black rectangle sits on the line. And secondly, it sits on the middle line and not any other line. The reason these 2 things are important becomes clear if we now look at the semibreve rest. We use the same little black rectangle, but notice how this time it hangs from the line rather than sits like the minim rest. And secondly, it hangs from the line above where the minim rest sits. A semibreve rest will only ever hang from the line which I've highlighted in red. An important feature of the semibreve rest is that it also represents a full bars rest in almost every other time signature. There are a few exceptions, but if you see this, it means either a 4-beat rest or a whole bars rest. The dotted minim rest looks like a minim rest, but has a dot next to it. The dot works in exactly the same way as it does with a note. It adds half the value of the rest to itself. In other words, the black rectangle sitting on the line is a rest worth 2. The dot adds half of that value to itself, 1. So 2 plus 1 equals 3. Dots can be added to other rest symbols. Here's our crotchet rest, which is worth 1. If we add a dot next to it, 1 plus half of its own value, a half, equals 1.5. Now you might ask, why have a dotted crotchet rest when you could just have a crotchet rest and then a quaver rest instead? Well, yes, you can, but there are some very complicated rules about the use of rest, and I do cover them in another of my videos. For the moment, just be sure that you understand that dots can be added to rests as well as notes. So before we finish, just a reminder, you must learn these notes, their names, their values, and their rest symbol. Secondly, if it helps to remember the value of notes, draw a pyramid like I did earlier. Thirdly, a dot next to a note or a rest adds half the value of the note or rest value to itself. So here's a quaver rest, which is worth half. Add a dot, it becomes 3/4. As half, add half of itself, a quarter, becomes 3/4.